I believe that everybody has a story, and I'm fascinated to hear them. So come with me as we take a walk down Fascination Street. Welcome back, Streetwalkers. This episode is with Rachel Dolezal. Yes, that one. In this episode, we talk about everything that happened that thrust her into the limelight. We talked about some of the events that led up to that, as far as the relationship between her and her, I guess, genetic family members. We also talk about her book, a little bit about her artwork, and we talk a lot about separating humans into races based on color and genetic properties, and how that's a social construct. So enjoy, folks. This is my conversation with Rachel Dolezal. Welcome to Fascination Street Podcast, Rachel Dolezal. How you doing today, Rachel?
I'm doing well, and you?
I am wonderful. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I'm sure that that decision isn't easy to make, this many interviews into your life, but thank you for doing that.
Yeah, well, thanks for the invitation, and I'm, looking forward to, hopefully, cautiously looking forward to a good experience.
That is an understandable statement. Now, I was listening to a couple of previous podcast interviews that you did.
Mm-hmm.
Some from a few years ago, some from, a few months ago. But I did notice that it seemed like they were just attacking you. And
right.
It made me wonder why you would agree to do these. But then I remember you had said, I'll do this if you promise it's not going to be, you're not going to be a dick or whatever. And so I'm thinking that all these people just promised everything was going to be cool and then they just attacked you.
Totally. Even some of them I requested or insisted on pre-written questions, and then they just totally didn't stick with those and just launched into other things. And then at that point, it is always a dilemma. Like, do you just hang up or stop the interview, or do you continue and try to hold your ground? And, I don't like to be put on the defensive, because I don't think that's ever the best place to tell a story or get a message out. But it's been just a lot of that, a lot of ambushing.
One, I just want to thank you again for agreeing to do this, especially considering how you have been treated by interviewers in the past. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
But secondly, why did you agree? I have to feel like if I was in your shoes and I had been hit out of nowhere as many times as I'm guessing you have on these things, why did you even say yes?
Well, because I really just keep picking up and trying again. I just am kind of relentless in insisting on the right to live a normal life. And I feel like it's not on me if 9 out of 10 times somebody wants to play into the negative or not do what they promised. That's like on them, but I have to still have hope. I have to still engage. I can't just disengage and go hide in a corner somewhere. So I really am trying to stay out there and, move forward and continue to express myself and have a voice, because I just refuse to let all of the negativity and all the attacks silence me and push me into a state of depression where I don't trust anybody. And I know I have every reason not to trust anybody in media, but
that's the truth.
I tend to give the smaller frameworks like podcasts a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt than the larger mainstream media at this point.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
My goal is for us to get to know you and where you came from, and I guess why we all know your name. So first of all, can you tell us where you grew up?
Yeah, I grew up in Troy, Montana, which is a really small town, population like 3,000, approximately 3,000 of those people are white. So it's like in the mountains in the very northwest corner of Montana.
So it's roughly 100% white?
Roughly.
That's funny. I was going to guess Troy, Montana. I would have put that somewhere around 115% white, but we'll go with your number. Whatever. That's fine. And so you grew up in a predominantly white small town.
Mm-hmm.
And then where did you go to college?
So I went to Belhaven College. Now it's Belhaven University in Jackson, Mississippi for undergrad. And then I went to Howard University for grad school after that.
Howard University?
And that's in Washington, D.C. So I went from Montana to Mississippi to Washington, D.C.
Now, I didn't go to a university, so I don't know for certain, but I'm going to assume that maybe was race not a question? Ethnic makeup, was that a question on the application?
For Belhaven or Howard?
Yes.
Both. I don't know if race was a question on the Belhaven College application. I don't really remember that one particularly, but I do know for certain that when I applied to Howard University, there was no question on their application because it's a university that exists to promote Black values and is very, one of the oldest historically Black colleges and universities in the nation, and my dream school for graduate school. So my entire life kind of had built up to that point of going to Howard, and I was elated to be accepted and pursue my Master of Fine Arts degree there.
To what end? What did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, I actually wanted to be an advocate and an activist. Actually, before I ever went to college, I ended up getting art scholarships for undergrad and then grad school based on my art talent. And so kind of like, an athletic scholarship, you have to follow that track. So you can't just not play football if you have a football scholarship, so I had an art scholarship, and that was pretty much what I then had to major in. I do somewhat regret that I didn't get wasn't able to maybe get a history degree or something else, because I am very passionate about social justice issues, history, sociology, that kind of thing, for the advocacy work that I've done. But yeah, I did the Master of Fine Arts track, and the goal for that was to be able to teach art at the college level. And also the idea was, because I was married at the time I went to Howard, if I had children, I'd be able to create art in the summers, teach during a school year. That would be a good career to kind of combine with domestic lifestyle. And at that time, I still was kind of a little bit in the mindset of the religion and patriarchy that I was raised with to kind of position me to make choices that were good for being a wife and mother, and not necessarily just what do you want to do as an individual in the world, but what do you want to do that will go along with the stations in life that you should be holding, which are wife and mother, primarily.
Right. What religion was that?
So I was raised Christian Pentecostal, and it was very fundamentalist, the kind of casting demons out of people, speaking in tongues, all that kind of stuff. It was a little bit weird. And it was I felt like there was a lot of fear involved in my childhood based on that mindset, just because there is always the fear of hell. If you mess up or do anything that's punishable, like you're going straight to hell, and you don't want to go to hell. So you have to do what the Bible says. You have to do what the authority person says. And it was a very repressive and oppressive childhood and mindset that I was raised with.
Gotcha. Now, this may be incorrect information on my part, but I understand that you had some instances of trauma at home growing up. And if it's too difficult to talk about, I understand that. But if it's not, can you just maybe briefly, what did you go through as a growing up a kid?
Yeah. So just, when I was born, I was born as a second-class citizen in the sense that I was a girl, and girls defer to boys and to men. And I have 4 adopted siblings who were Black, and that was also kind of deemed a second-class status within that household. I would describe my biological family as white supremacy based. They wouldn't say that, but there's a lot of racism there, and also sexism, and also homophobia, and a lot of other things that kind of were intertwined with that fundamentalist Christian religion. We had to read a chapter of the Old Testament before we ate breakfast. We had to read a chapter of the New Testament before we ate dinner. So I don't even know how many times I read the Bible growing up. So that was kind of the basis. But I say that in connection with trauma, because a lot of the punishment, like corporal punishment and abuse, as well as sexual, like molestation, was kind of justified in terms of you don't have any say as a girl. And if you do want to talk about it, you can sit at the table and write out scripture verses about what God will do to liars, because the man is the one that is believed, and girls lie and girls aren't going to be heard. So I learned to submit to the man, and I didn't learn very many defense mechanisms or ways to object to male authority when appropriate. So it took a long time. It was definitely after my divorce, because my marriage was kind of along a similar lines of that religious and patriarchal mindset. So after the divorce, I was able to kind of come into my own spirit, my own self, as far as what I independently as a human being connect with, and what feeds my soul. And healing from some of that childhood trauma was definitely a very important part of, embracing who I am as an individual in the world, and really just knowing myself and being comfortable in that.
Gotcha. Now, I think you said that you had 4, were they adopted siblings or foster siblings? Adopted?
No, adopted. As infants. So,
okay, as infants.
Yeah.
So, and just so that I have the correct terminology, do you call them African American or Black?
Well, I think that people should, I don't really call them
Well, that is
anything, but I would say that.
Boy, did that come out wrong.
Right. One of my siblings, because I believe that people should be self-determined and should speak for themselves, So you'd have to talk to each of them today on what they want to be called. But so one of my siblings came from Haiti and had dual citizenship in Haiti and the U.S. So, that's a specific background. That's not a traditional African-American background. One of my siblings was very light-skinned, mixed, and didn't actually align with being Black or African-American or anything until 2015. That was the first time that I heard him actually describe himself as Black in the interviews. But he had always been kind of thought to be by our mother, thought to be like part Jewish, because she had prayed for a Jewish child. So he was kind of like the chosen one. Out of the 4 adopted siblings, he was the favorite because he was the lightest complexion. He had freckles, didn't look like he could pass for Jewish or white or whatever. And then my 2 African American siblings, what I would say from a more traditional definition of that term, would be my sister and my other brothers, who actually I gained custody of because I sued my parents for child abuse and won custody of Isaiah and raised him as my oldest son. So it is very complex to go through that. But so my sister and my oldest son are part of our family. Like, we kind of just started a new family tree. So we don't connect with or talk to or associate with any of the other family members, and haven't for many years.
Gotcha.
And that's been kind of part of our healing process, again, from the trauma. My sister and I were both, even though my older brother was my biological brother, he molested, both me and my adopted sister. So, we have that connection on healing from that perspective. And there are just, a lot of other issues that the 3 of us, so it's kind of 3 and 3 as far as the siblings. They split, 3 that stayed with the parents and 3 that diverged. And like the brother that was born in Haiti, he actually is very into like flying Confederate flags and,
what?
Chewing tobacco and doing like very, so that's why I say, like, I'm not going to put a label, like, I don't know how he would describe himself, but that's his lifestyle. And he's still kind of in the parents' network. The other sibling who was mixed is very pro-Trump and very like, just, I don't know. I don't want to go into anything that would, I just feel like there's a psychological misorientation that we were raised with, and that got internalized by some of the siblings, and then others developed their own revolution against it and kind of some of us emancipated ourselves mentally from that upbringing.
Right. I heard you say once in an interview that race is a social construct. Can you tell everybody what that means, or what you mean by that?
Yeah, well, I'm definitely not the first person to say that. It's not something I made up. It's well known in academia. Any 101 sociology class will tell you just that. I mean, race, the definition of race in connection with separating the human race into separate categories is and has been disproven as, science. Like it's definitely not a scientific idea. The human race does not meet the zoological requirements for separate races. Like some species, like dogs, for example, meet that requirement of separate breeds and that kind of thing. But the human race doesn't. We're 99% the same. And there is no gene for race. There are genetic components that can dictate hair texture, eye shape, or skin tone, which are three of the things that we associate with race historically. But back to the origin of the concept of race, it was created during the colonial era in order to subjugate certain groups based on visual differences. And so there are many books. Like I would recommend actually 3 books, all written by Black women who really expose race as a social construct and a myth. Would be Race in North America, Origin and Evolution of a Worldview, Fatal Invention, How Race is Recreated in the 21st Century, and The Nature of Race. So those are Dorothy Roberts, Audrey Smedley, and Dr. Ann Morning. And I actually did not come to an awareness of race as a social construct until I was in graduate school. So until I went to Howard University, and Audrey Smedley was the mother of the chair of my thesis committee there, David Smedley, and he is the one who gave me her book to read. And it was like this huge aha moment for me, because all of my life I had felt like I didn't belong. I had felt like this dissonance between my family and my spirit, like how I look and how I felt, and the fact that I connected more with my adopted siblings than with my biological family, and so on and so forth. And I felt like such an at-home place in Mississippi when I went to college there in the Black community versus the Southern white community. I felt no sense of connection. And I was the historian for the Black Student Union in undergrad, and I started the first African American history course on campus, which still exists to this day, and also, worked with the president for recruitment and retention of Black students. So when it comes to, race as a social construct, I did not understand that to be, a truth until I was in graduate school. And from that point forward, it was something that I love to read about and teach. I taught a lot of race and culture classes at Eastern Washington University and so forth. So basically, to say it's a social construct means that people invent it and people act on it. And I myself have been treated differently based on people's perceptions. If they perceive me to be mixed or Black, they're, in a medical clinic, I will immediately be tested for HIV. The police officer that pulls me over, will issue, a high fine. Like, the officer identifies the person doesn't identify themselves. In a medical clinic, you identify yourself on the form, and then the medical personnel react to you on that basis. So, and there are many situations, just even from dating to jobs. One of the jobs that I had in North Idaho was director of the Human Rights Education Institute, and that was a position that every white female and white male prior to me becoming the director had received, a certain salary, and I was offered half of that salary. And the outgoing director described me as a colored gal, and the board of directors, when they offered me that salary, they said I could earn the full salary if I did XYZ, which of course they never gave me the full salary. And later, admitted that they perceived me or saw me as African American, and that's, like I never contradicted any of that. Like, oh, I need the full salary because of this or that. So it's kind of like that's what race as a social construct is that it's a doing, it's a behavior. People treat other people differently, especially in a discriminatory way, because they perceive this difference based on hair texture, eye shape, skin tone, etc. And I think in America, the one-drop rule, the Jim Crow one-drop rule that was so oppressive, still really carries on today in terms of how people are treated. And that needs to be questioned, and I think to highlight the fact that race as a social construct can begin to undo racism.
Wow. I feel like right after everything that happened with you being thrust into the media and the public the public eye. I feel like it was 45 minutes after that all of a sudden it was okay for everybody to identify however they wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
Boys identifying as girls, girls identifying as boys, people identifying as neither or both or whatever. I think it's super weird that all happened right after there was an issue with how you identify yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's just weird to me. So if you were given a form and let's medical or whatever, and you were asked to identify yourself, what would you mark? What box would you check?
Like right now?
Today, right now.
I refuse to check a box.
Good for you.
Because of how everybody has obsessed on all of this. However, if it's required, like there are forms that are optional and you can refuse to check. And in the past, there have been forms that I've refused to check. It's not something just brand new. But sometimes there's like, for example, when my son Langston was born in 2017 or 2016, sorry, it was medically necessary for me to list a category. Now, in Washington State, and this actually also points to the fact that this is a whole construct because state laws vary from state to state across the United States. And in Washington State, whatever the mother describes herself as is what the child is labeled as when it comes to race. It does not matter if the mother is Asian and the father is white, the child's Asian. If the mother is white and the dad is Asian, the child is white. Now, in some states, it's the reverse. It's the father. But most states, it's matriarchal because that goes back to, once again, the oppressive history in the United States, where if you're born of a Black mother, you're Black. If you're born of a Black woman on a plantation, you are enslaved. And it doesn't matter who the dad is because then that allows for rape from the slave owner or master. And so, that really painful history is connected to a lot of these state laws that still perpetuate that matriarchal heritage. So in the case of when Langston was born, I literally put standby guardianship with my oldest son, Isaiah, in case the state decided to, sue me for falsifying a form, which of course, how can they do that when race isn't even a biological scientific thing, but actually just a social construct. But anyways, just to cover all the bases and protect my child, because I put Black and white as a compromise. I put that on Langston's form. So that's what I put for me, because I know that some people now see me as white and I still am pro-Black and I still identify that way. So that's what I'm going to put on that form. And I'm not going to allow the state to whitewash my child and just list him as white. So anyway, I think about it a lot when there's a form involved, because I think about not only, my sense of self and knowing and believing who I am, and that we all go back to, we're all members of, to be technical, the Black human race, because we all come from Africa, we all come from a Black woman, and the genetic pool circles back that direction. So technically, that's the one thing that everybody could claim is Blackness, because that is our roots. But that's been erased in order to dehumanize, in order to oppress, and in order to kind of like segregate groups of people based on looks. And I think now in the United States, we're heading toward a time when by 2050, more than half of the population will be more than one group, and so what are we doing to prepare for inclusion and acceptance of people who are in between in whatever way, whether it's bi, tri, quad, racial, or people who don't want to check that box or don't want to check any box. So I just think it's a personal decision when encountering a form. Is it optional? Is it required? And then depending on the form, a lot of forms offer different options. So, some forms ask different questions and give you different options to check. So you could stack up all those forms and say that this person wasn't consistent with how they identified, but really it's the forms that are typically inconsistent with what the types of questions and options being offered.
Well, that was a long answer, but it was a very informative, and it explained a lot instead of just a yes or no. So thank you for that.
Yeah, for sure.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors.
Guess what, Streetwalkers? The gear is here. A bunch of you have been asking for quite some time, and now finally it's here. Head over to FascinationStreetPod.com and check out the Gear tab. There, you'll find all kinds of FSP items to tickle your fancy. T-shirts, coffee mugs, sticker packs, pins, buttons, coasters, and my personal favorite, for just $5 you can get one of those weird little phone handle pop thingies. So head to FascinationStreetPod.com and show the world that you're proud to be a streetwalker. Special thanks to my good buddy Stephen O'Reilly from the Bar Star Podcast for these dope drum beats. Check out Steve's work at O'Reilly Drums on Instagram or search Stephen O'Reilly on YouTube.
Let's get back into it.
So, given your childhood trauma and your young adult trauma, did it make it especially painful that it was your parents that were talking about you on TV that started all of this?
Oh, absolutely. Not only the fact that, the parents who hadn't spoken with, in years were poking that pain of childhood trauma on national television, but also the fact that the entire reason they were discrediting me as a person and using words like liar and fraud and con were to protect my older brother and my sister's older brother from going to prison as a child molester, because it was my sister's case and her quest for justice in the matters of sexual assault by our older brother Josh that jury trial was that summer, and I was her key witness because there was a pattern where the only two girls, and I was going to testify and basically break the tie between a he said, she said case. And so, there are more than 30 instances of sexual assault. And if that trial had happened, there would have very likely been a conviction. So what they did right before I was scheduled to testify in Colorado, this was not a local case. This was outside of my state and outside of the state that the parents live in, and even outside of the state where Josh, the older brother, lives in. So it was in Colorado. So they really had to go to national news media to discredit me. And that's why the label of liar was so important for them. And unfortunately, to discredit me for a jury, basically. So the case was dropped and my sister never got her day in court. So they were successful because they went on they went on CNN, ABC, NBC, Fox, within like 24 hours. And that was their goal, and they succeeded. And my sister never had her day in court. I did the Netflix documentary. I wrote my memoir in hopes of rebuilding my reputation, to share my whole story and really hope that people would understand a lot of the complexities and nuances behind not just my decisions, but the whole family situation. And, it wasn't quick enough. It wasn't successful enough to really turn the tide on public opinion. So my sister's case is now, the statute of limitations has expired, so she's not able to get justice, which is really heartbreaking.
Wow. So all of this stemmed from a court case?
When it comes to the parents' intentions, yes. And when it comes to the local media and, the city here, they collaborated with the parents to get it started in the local press because there was kind of a drive to unseat me from the Police Accountability Commission because I was really holding the police, feet to the fire, per se, on issues of police brutality. And there was a Black man that was killed at the jail, and I was on a quest for justice for him. And in that case, they actually removed me and two other commissioners. So basically shut down the whole commission. It was only a total of 5 people. Well, everybody's hyped up and arguing over whether I'm Black or white. They just shut down police accountability and excused the sheriff and the chief of police were both implicated in that particular homicide. It was both of their departments and 13 officers. So they swept that under the rug. That was their motivation, so everybody had their stake in the game. And that's why my name blew up at such a huge level, because there was a municipal agenda for shutting down my leadership locally in Spokane, Washington. And then there was a family agenda for branding me as a liar, on a national level to save the oldest and most favored son in the family.
Wow.
And I might mention the only child out of 6 who would be carrying on their so-called white bloodline.
Wow. That is certainly a lot to deal with. Oh, wow. Sorry. Oof. So I think you said that you sued your biological parents for your brother, for custody of your brother?
Right.
Was that before or after that other case that never happened?
Oh, no, this is a long time ago. So he was actually 21 when this all happened in 2015. So no, I had raised him and he was actually in college, well, home for the summer from college, but that was, many years before all of this happened.
Gotcha.
And it was heartbreaking too, because I just wanted him to have as normal of a childhood as possible. And he didn't want anybody to know about having been adopted by this family, but, by Larry Ruth Ann and the whole backstory and all that trauma and pain. So through school, like at high school and stuff, like nobody saw me as like an adoptive mother. It was just I was his mom. And a lot of people assumed I had a teen pregnancy, and that's how he came into the world, because I was his mom. And then, that's how it was. And we didn't feel the need to explain to anybody. So when all of this happened, it was his 21st birthday, June 11th, when the media exploded about it. And he had a lot of his friends from high school calling or texting, like, why did you lie to us? That wasn't your real mom. And, and it was just basically like he felt like it was nobody's business. And why would he have to explain that he was like born in Chicago, then adopted by this weird family on this mountain side of Montana, and then his previously older sister, who had actually taken care of him since he was 2 weeks old, sued the parents for child abuse and got custody of him, and that's how he ended up in the family. Like nobody needs to know all that. That's just very personal and kind of re-traumatizing to tell people, especially when they're strangers or just meet them in school. So it was quite the crazy time for all of us when things blew up in the media. And I was really focused on managing not just his well-being and emotions, but also my sister and her, situation. And then my younger son, Franklin, who was 13 at the time. And a few days later found out I was actually 1 month pregnant. So then there was that to manage as well. So I kind of went into a little bit of like mother mode and focused a lot on just the kids and making sure everybody was okay. Because it was a lot to have that level of personal business just blasted on such a national level, and then connected with all the mockery and the jokes and insults and everything else. It was tough. No, not just for me, but for them too.
Well, I bet. I mean, I can't even imagine. This is going to sound super insensitive, but I don't mean that in any way at all. But with all of that going on, that seems like a lot of pressure. And at some points, I'm sure you felt like you were on an island by yourself trying to do all this alone.
Mm-hmm.
Was there ever a time that you thought about maybe taking your own life?
I do believe that if I had not been a mother and didn't have, so many people kind of leaning on me for support, that would have been something on my mind. I definitely felt like it was very difficult to stay on the planet for sure, but my love for my kids, my love for my sister is really what kept me here. And I think too, like in a sense, the pregnancy, the fact that I happened to be 1 month pregnant at the time was kind of a little bit of a gift too, because I didn't have the option of drinking or doing, like resorting to any kind of a self-destructive coping mechanism. It was like I had to take care of my body for my baby. And I have a very strong, nurturing sensibility. And so it's easy to kind of like access that and go into that mode. That's going to supersede any sort of care about, my own feelings. But definitely I entered a pretty major state of depression. For sure.
Well, I'm glad that you made it through that, and hopefully things are better on that front. So, here's crossing my fingers.
Thanks.
So, what is social justice, and when did it become important to you?
So I think social justice is basically it's a specific type of justice, I guess, but it covers a lot of different causes. It really became important to me. I feel like, justice as an issue was always important as a child, but especially once I became kind of a big sister slash mother to my younger siblings. They were adopted into, of course, this whitescape of Montana. So that then brought the issues of racial and social justice like even more to the forefront, and the sense of history connecting with contemporary issues of rejection and discrimination and prejudice. And I think fighting for social justice just means to fight for equality and inclusion. And, those have been values that not only connect with people that I love, but also my own quest for healing and my own sense of being, rejected and treated unfairly from childhood on in many instances. So, yeah, I think that fighting for social justice really does connect with that sense of pain from my childhood, but also is just, a sense of a quest for equality and for freedom and for inclusion, not on a limited or conditional scale, but like full scale inclusion.
Well said. So before the massive blow up, I guess, I think you were the president of your local chapter of the NAACP. Is that right?
Right.
How did you get involved with the NAACP? I mean, I would imagine you don't just walk in as president. I'm assuming that you worked your way up to president.
Well, I wasn't necessarily on a mission to become president. I had been involved in the, social justice community, the human rights community. As I said, I was director of the Human Rights Education Institute in North Idaho, which actually is just 30 miles from Spokane. So it's right basically in the same community.
Oh, okay.
As we live in here. So my work there became known regionally when I was the director there, because I actually was appointed director in the same month and year as Obama was elected president in 2008. And so my leadership, because it was, nobody actually asked me, are you Black? Like people assumed, and a lot of the media as well as the board of directors and everything, I didn't say, well, this is my family and this is my whole story. I did not talk to people about all my personal backstory, but there was a lot of labeling that just took place because it was in this very conservative and white community, and my leadership was very pro-Black. And so that was a very true and accurate sense of seeing me, as that was my intention for making this place a better place to raise my kids after I kind of was stuck here from a divorce, in a custody case that was going to keep me in the area for 15 years. So I really had to think about, how do I want this place to be for my Black sons to grow up in? And that's why I started the Human Rights Education Institute. My leadership there also, gained regional attention because that institute exists only because the Aryan Nations International Compound in North Idaho was shut down by the Southern Poverty Law Center, and the institute was born out of that as like a preventative measure. If we can educate people about human rights and social justice and inclusion issues, then hopefully this international headquarters and compound and the ideas and ideals of white supremacy won't sprout up again in this area. So it was kind of a cause that, just was close to my heart, and my work in the area was opposed from white supremacy groups, as you can imagine. And so the NAACP in Spokane supported the Human Rights Education Institute in a few key times when that percolated to the surface. At one point, the leader of the Aryan Nations, was talking on BBC radio about how Obama was a bastard child and I was a bastard child, and it wouldn't be wrong to kill either one of us because, anybody of mixed blood doesn't have a soul and is not really fully human, et cetera. So it's kind of like this very weird space in which, North Idaho exists with these kind of like oppositional forces. And then when I moved to Spokane, I had just become chair of the Police Accountability Commission for the city, which is an unpaid position. And the election for Spokane NAACP presidency was coming up, and there was nobody running against the incumbent. I didn't actually put my name on the ballot, but the treasurer and the secretary did. I wasn't even present at the meeting when that happened because I was at the first meeting of the Police Ombudsman Commission. I know this is again another long answer, and I apologize for that. But
no, don't apologize.
It is somewhat complicated because I think people imagine that there was, is a paid position, there's something in it for me, or that there was some kind of forum. And I was like, I'm Black, so I can be president of the NAACP or whatever, and it just didn't happen that way. It was based on, not my complexion or my hairstyle or anything else. It was based on my leadership in the community that people said, you know what, she can actually save this chapter from folding, because the chapter that had existed, Spokane NAACP, had been here 95 years and was on the brink of, having its charter revoked from the national organization because it wasn't being managed correctly. They had debt and there were less than the minimum of active committees. So it was about 30 members or so when I took office. I did actually win the election by a landslide, and then took office and was juggling these two unpaid positions, the volunteer work with teaching at the university and writing for one of the local papers, a column. And so all of that was a lot to juggle, but also raise my profile to the level of, a little bit of a threat to the city. The chief of police did not like that I was the chair of the Accountability Commission and the president of the NAACP simultaneously, because he felt like that was a conflict of interest and was an anti-police position, kind of like a anti-police double jeopardy
stance.
Yeah. So, anyways, yeah, there were a lot of people that didn't like that, but I grew the membership within just 5 months from 30 people to over 200, and
Wow.
raised $14,000 and moved our office from a very obscure church location to Main Street, right next door to the legislative offices. So it was really starting to explode, and a lot of, new interest was happening, and a lot of youth involvement, because of course I was the Black Student Union faculty advisor at Eastern Washington University. So a lot of the college students were starting to get engaged in the NAACP as well. And I was the first person to start the Black Lives Matter marches in Spokane. And, like a lot of that was, it was around the time of Michael Brown's death in Ferguson. And just, a lot of the national issues were connecting to local issues. So that was kind of like the backdrop for what happened in 2015.
Now, around all that, there was hubbub everywhere coming from all over the place, but I don't think I ever heard an official response from the national office of the NAACP. Was there one?
Oh, absolutely. But the reason why you didn't hear it is because they were very supportive of me. And so national media wouldn't, you can even Google NAACP response to Rachel Dolezal, and it's still online. So, but people just ignored it. Pretty much anything that was supportive was ignored, and anything that was against or oppositional was blasted. So a lot of the, most supportive people, even in the Netflix documentary, there are like 12 local people in the Black community that, spoke out in my defense and in support, but they were cut from that film, And so a lot of the perception has been that there's no support, and then that perception then breeds less public support. So a lot of the support stays private, and then people kind of follow suit. You know what I mean? Like if there's public support, then people can kind of like jump on that bandwagon. But when the support stays private, it's hard to jump on a private bandwagon, because it's not really a bandwagon. It's just like party of one, at a time. So yeah, it was very interesting that, and I don't know if you have a computer handy, but like sometimes just Google that. And basically the national organization said that, they stand by me and are proud of my advocacy work, and it's beyond reproach, and that they don't care who my parents are or, what race or ethnicity I am, that my work is solid, and that, I deserve some privacy because there's a family legal matter that's pending. And the NAACP itself was founded by actually more white members than Black members, back in the day when it started as an organization. So they really didn't care whether I was white or Black. They just cared about my leadership abilities and my commitment to the cause.
Gotcha.
The NAACP has released this statement in support of Rachel Dolezal. For 106 years, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People has held a long and proud tradition of receiving support from people of all faiths, races, colors, and creeds. NAACP's Spokane, Washington branch president Rachel Dolezal is enduring a legal issue with her family, and we respect her privacy in this matter. One's racial identity is not a qualifying criteria or disqualifying standard for NAACP leadership. The NAACP Alaska, Oregon, Washington State Conference stands behind Rachel Dolezal's advocacy record. In every corner of this country, the NAACP remains committed to securing political, educational, and economic justice for all people, and we encourage Americans of all stripes to become members and serve as leaders in our organization. Hate language sent through mail and social media, along with credible threats, continue to be a serious issue for our units in the Pacific Northwest and across the nation. We take all threats seriously and encourage the FBI and the Department of Justice to fully investigate each occurrence.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors.
Hey guys, if you like what I'm doing, click the Amazon banner at the top of the homepage on FascinationStreetPod.com and do all of your shopping through Amazon. Once you click on it and it takes you to Amazon, you can bookmark it or add it to your favorites and you won't have to go to my site each time. It helps them keep the show going, and again, thanks for listening.
Let's get back into it.
Last week I told somebody that I was going to be interviewing you because I was so excited. And that person couldn't understand why I wanted to interview you, which confused me. They said that basically you wore blackface for a bunch of years. Now, I'm sure that you've heard different versions of that from different segments of the population all over the place. But if that person was in front of you, what would you say to them?
Well, I would say that that person probably doesn't understand, number one, what I have actually done or not done, and also doesn't understand the history of blackface. Because once again, the parents use that word, that was promoted in the media as a way to discredit me and to connect me to a very painful history in America. The history of mockery and playing minstrel roles, darkening face with, I think it was initially shoe polish in the early 1900s. And it was very degrading, and it's a very painful and oppressive history, the history of blackface. And I think that needs to be clear. I don't support blackface, and I don't consider my lifestyle to be blackface. That's just like a very absurd accusation, but that's one that has gained traction in the media. Like once somebody said that, then other people repeat it. And so that's just something that's like a loop. It's a clickbait thing to say, and it's just on repeat. So, what can I say about it? I just continue to live my life. And if people, want to accuse me of that, I guess, like their opinions don't define who I am.
Nice. I love it. Now, in the course of this interview, you have said here, and you have said this place, and you have said here and this place. Am I under the impression that you still live in the same area that didn't treat you so favorably? Do you still live in that same area?
Yes, unfortunately, I do. But once again, it is out of love for my children. I have to stay here, as I mentioned previously, like for that 15 years. My son Franklin was 3 when I divorced his dad, and his dad still lives in Hayden, Idaho, and has not been willing to allow us to move. And without his permission, I would have to leave Franklin behind. And I'm not willing to leave my son behind,
Gotcha.
No matter how much I have to scrape and scratch and claw for survival here on a income level. I still haven't been able to get a job anywhere, so I'm self-employed. But looking forward to 2020 when he graduates and I can relocate finally. And I'll take the little guy, he's 3.5 now, he'll be 4 at that point, and raise him elsewhere.
Gotcha. That makes way more sense. I was super confused why you would stay there, but that explains everything.
Once again, it's out of love for these kids. I will fight for my kids. I don't care what anybody has to say about it. Like, I'm not going to leave them behind.
Good. Well done. Now, I listened to a bunch of interviews, or watched a bunch of interviews to prepare for this. Like I said, I was very excited.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it was the Today Show with Matt Lauer.
Mm-hmm.
He might have been one of the biggest assholes toward you in any of the interviews that I've heard you or seen you in.
Right.
I'm going to assume that was sort of a bait and switch kind of a thing. I can't imagine that you would knowingly walk into being treated like that. So let's assume that was, all sort of underhanded and dirty, which makes sense. But my question is, was there just a little tiny part of you that smirked when Matt Lauer got in trouble?
Well, I don't necessarily wish bad things on anyone, but I do find some irony in it just because that was actually my very first interview. And to give you a little context, that was the most watched episode of the Today Show in the entire history of the Today Show was my interview with Matt Lauer. So they clearly, their agenda was to make money off of that. I was only going there because of two reasons. Number one, they said, well, your parents had said all this stuff. We just want to give you an opportunity to speak, and share your story and your side, which is, of course, not what they did. But the other thing, because I knew that they may not be honest, while they accused me of lying, they may not be honest themselves. And in order to get a fair interview, one of my favorite people working for NBC was Melissa Harris Perry. And I just, I loved her show. And so I said, if I do today, you have to give me an interview with her. That's the only way I'll agree to NBC, because every channel was camped around my house for days. CNN, Fox, ABC, NBC. And they were knocking on the door. They were yelling through the door. They were shoving things through the mail slot. Like every network wanted to be the first one to hear my voice respond to the parents. So I went with NBC because of Melissa Harris Perry, and her interview is one of the more fair ones of that. I did 3 interviews at the same time, back to back. I did Matt Lauer, and then I went straight across the studio and did Savannah Guthrie, and then I went straight into another room and did Melissa Harris Perry all in one morning, and it was exhausting. But that was my first statement. Basically, those 3 interviews were the first response. But when Matt was, I was like, oh, I bet that morning that he's condescending and being rude to me, he probably was banging the intern in his office or something. Like, who knows, But he made $25 million a year. I made nothing on that interview. And I think that a lot of what happened in terms of the media taking advantage of using me for sensationalism and dragging my name and everything also has to do with the fact that I couldn't fight back financially. I didn't have a PR team. I was a single mom working just paycheck to paycheck. And I think that was a big area of vulnerability. They knew that I couldn't sue them or really stand up for myself from a financial position.
Well, it made me laugh hysterically. Because I was like, haha, Matt, karma's a bitch.
Right.
So what is the name of your book? And what is it about?
So my book is titled In Full Color, Finding My Place in a Black and White World. And it is my memoir up through 2016. It was published in 2017. So it's kind of an early memoir because I was, in my late 30s. But it's definitely like my whole story, my true story. Nothing is spun or edited in a way that gives somebody else's take. I feel like anything but my book is another perspective. That's the only place where my true story lives is in my book, because it's been trashed and slashed and degraded by media, mostly people who haven't even given it a chance to read. It hasn't sold enough copies to actually pay off publishing costs, so I haven't seen any royalties since it was published. But I think that eventually, hopefully, it will get some readership. Maybe after I'm dead and gone, I don't know. Maybe it'll be an inheritance thing for the kids. They can make money off of book sales. But whatever the case, it is out there. It is my whole story. It was endorsed by the regional president of the NAACP. He wrote a review which is on the back of the book, and he was my direct supervisor during my time here in that role. So it's just my life story. It's actually chronological order. There's a photo insert that shows my birth certificate, my baby pictures on through my entire life story, and, just shares the reasons why I made the choices I did all along the way.
I have a hunch that if somebody wanted to purchase that book and maybe even an autographed copy, they could find it at racheldolezal.com?
Yes, absolutely.
What else might somebody find at racheldolezal.com?
Back to Howard University, I have my degree in fine arts. So I'm an artist, and I have all of my available original artwork on my website, as well as signed prints of select pieces. I also make handmade dolls, which are called melanin spectrum dolls, which range from like a very pale skin tone all the way to a very dark skin tone. So like 5 different skin tones in the same set of dolls. And so the idea is not just to get the doll that looks like you, but to have a spectrum of dolls to play with for children so that one of them might look like you and then the others might not, and you can still enjoy them, because I think a lot of families have a range of skin tone. You know, you're going to have a cousin or an aunt or an uncle or a sister even, or a brother or whatever, or a friend at school that may not look exactly like you. So that's what those dolls are about. And then I also have, for people who consider themselves fans, which is kind of funny to me because I don't really consider myself a celebrity, but there are a few people who like to get autographed photos. And I do have some pictures of me that I can sign and ship from that website as well.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Real quick, can you tell everybody where they can find you on social media?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm at Rachel A. Dolezal on Instagram and Twitter. I have a Facebook page. All of those platforms are blue checked. So if you don't see a blue check mark, it's not me. There's still some people out there trying to set up fake accounts. So I have the verified accounts. I also have a YouTube channel. So you can just search for Rachel Dolezal channel on YouTube, and it has kind of a little black and white picture of me. Try and ignore the ton of crap that you'll see below that that also comes up with that search. And I do, weekly videos for YouTube, and sometimes I even do live videos, so people can find me there.
Oh, fantastic. Now, before I let you go, Rachel, is there anything that I didn't ask you or that we didn't talk about that you wanted to talk about?
There's a lot, but I think that it would probably fill up an entire, another episode. So usually there's a lot of stuff like, oh, I want to talk about my artwork and life and motherhood and all these other things, but nobody really usually asks about that. But it's fine. Like I said, there are ways to discover those aspects of me online and through my book and through my website and everything else. So it's cool.
Well, that said, everybody make sure you follow Rachel on Twitter, because every so often she will put up a picture of some of her artwork and it'll be like 50% off or something. Like, she runs sales on some of her artwork.
Yeah, for sure.
So everybody make sure you reach out and check those out, because they're really nice. I can understand why you went that direction as far as your degree. You have some talent, ma'am.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Rachel Dolezal, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to hang out and let us get to know you a little bit better on Fascination Street. It was an honor and a privilege. And again, thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for your time. And hopefully people find it fascinating.
Well, I can't imagine a scenario where they don't. So again, thank you so much.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye. As always, thanks for listening, Streetwalkers. And don't forget, follow the show on Twitter at FascinationSTPD, on Instagram at Fascination Street Pod. Follow the podcast page on Facebook at Fascination Street Podcast. And of course, you can always email me at fascinationstreetpod@gmail.com. And if you haven't already, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button and rate us on iTunes. For the next 3 months, everybody who rates and reviews the show and sends a screenshot to fascinationstreetpod@gmail.com will get a free surprise gift mailed to them. Every single one of you. So do it. Thanks, Streetwalkers. Opening music is the song Magnolia from the 2014 album Intransigence, used with permission from Douglas Miles Clark. Closing music is Apollo from the 2001 album Into the Known by the band Sapphire. Thanks for hanging out with us and getting to know a little bit about our guest. We'll see you next time on Fascination Street.